Hi, my name's Sam and welcome to Carl's Performance Garage. On today's video, I'm going to be pulling out the engine on my H6 Outback. The reason why I'm pulling out the engine on my Outback is because there was some sort of valve spring failure on cylinder 4. So I'm going to get the head sent off, get everything done to them. The head gaskets are weeping a tiny little bit, but not much at all. So I'm going to do everything at once. So it should be a nice, fresh engine that will last for years to come. So I've never actually pulled out a H6 engine before, but let's face it, it's a Boxster and it's Subaru, so it should be pretty much the same as an EJ. One thing that is good is because it's NA, there's no turbo to deal with or no lines, so it might even actually be a little bit quicker. But we'll see how it goes. I'll start pulling it out. I'm going to start by just dropping all the fluids. Once all the fluids are done, then I will start up top, go probably left to right. I'll probably take off the exhaust manifold underneath and whatever I can there too. And we'll see how it goes. So let's get started. I started off by lifting the car up on the hoist and removing the oil and the coolant. While the coolant was draining, I decided to take the exhaust off. With the majority of the coolant drained through the coolant plug, I then disconnected the bottom radiator hose and disconnected the transmission cooling hoses that connect to the radiator. Once those hoses were disconnected, I got a M8 bolt and a hose clamp, and then I put the M8 bolt in the transmission hoses and put the hose clamp around it to prevent any sort of transmission fluid from leaking out. I then removed the airbox and all of the intake stuff and unplugged the engine harness. One thing that is really good about this Outback is that the engine harness is all in one connector. So there's only one connector to deal with and really makes it a whole lot easier to remove this whole engine. Next, it was time to remove the radiator and the radiator hoses and remove the accessory belt along with the alternator wiring. As I was going through the front accessories, I did notice that the power steering pump is leaking a lot. So I'm going to get this sent off, rebuilt, so it won't be leaking anymore and it will be nice and fresh. It has been making a whining noise for quite some time, so I have been needing to replace it, but because the engine's out, it's a perfect time to do it. Now it was time to remove the alternator and undo the power steering pump and the AC compressor bolts. I'm not completely disconnecting and removing the AC compressor and the power steering pump because I can easily move them over to the side to get them out of the way for when I pull the engine out, and by keeping them connected I don't need to re-gas the AC or re-bleed the power steering pump. Now it's time to remove the fuel lines. I started off by opening the fuel tank cap to help remove some of the pressure from the system, and then I have these little hose clamps that will clamp the hose in place to reduce any sort of spillage. I always like to put a rag underneath where the fuel lines connect to the fuel rail just to prevent any sort of fuel leaking onto the engine or in the engine bay. Next, I started to remove the flex plate bolts. Basically, I used my crank tool to spin the crank around to access the bolts through the inspection cover, and then I just undid them with a ratchet. I realized because there is so much room underneath the manifold, I could actually move them in a spot where I could get an impact gun to loosen them quicker. With the torque converter disconnected, I could now start by removing the starter motor and the bell housing bolt. You don't want to remove all of the bell housing bolts straight away, because if you do, there is a possibility that the engine could tip forward. So I always loosen the bottom ones first and keep a few of the top ones there just to hold the engine in place until I am 100% ready to remove the engine. With everything ready to go in the engine, it is now time to remove it. So I got everything ready in its right spot and removed the engine. I found that removing this engine was actually really easy, just because there really isn't that many bolts you have to take out. As you can see, this is the bucket of bolts that I collected from just taking the engine out, and the majority of it is exhaust bolts, bell housing bolts, plus also I've got the inspection cover and the thermo. So it's another day and I'm not sure yet where the recording actually cut off last night from when I was pulling the engine out, but my camera ran out of battery, so I didn't get the very last little bit of actually getting the engine out from the car and putting on the new engine stand. One issue that I did have with removing the engine of the Outback was the engine leveler. So it connects to the engine crane. It's got a small little chain that connects to the leveler, then it's got chains to the engine. That whole clump, unfortunately, is too long. It meant that even though the engine crane was at its maximum height, the engine wouldn't actually clear the front radiator support. So it meant that we had to come up with a way to get it out. What I was first going to do was just get me and my dad to just lift the engine and support it while we pushed the car back and pushed the engine crane back, but the engine was, too heavy. So what we ended up doing was, with my dad on the back of the engine crane, supporting it, and then we got 2 trolley jacks right up the front to just jack it up a little bit. And so what we did was we then pushed the car back, so it meant that the engine was raised just enough to get over the front radiator support, car back, cleared it, and then we could finally pull it out. So I'm definitely going to need to do some modification to my engine leveler and the crane so I can just get that length a bit shorter, but I never used to have that leveler. I only recently bought it. I've always just used a ratchet strap just around the manifold, lift it up like that, and it's worked every time. But the leveler already has been so helpful. Being able to use the leveler to match the engine angle with the transmission angle has made it really easy to get them out. So I'm hoping it'll also make it really easy to get them in. Anyway, that's the video of removing my Outback's H6 engine. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any video ideas, suggestions or feedback, please leave them in the comments below. If you also like this video, please consider giving it a like. And also if you want to see more of my content, please consider subscribing as well. As always, you can follow me on Instagram at 07cars. And until next time, thanks for watching and keep on learning.